The Lord of the Rings Online is one of my most played games, yet the past couple years or so it has felt a bit different to me, and in particular, I haven't played as much group content. So what happened? Well, back in the day, I loved group content and spent a lot of time regularly farming instances and raids to push high difficulties. With the major launch event of the legendary servers in LOTRO in late 2018 on the new progression server, Anor, I basically continued with the same playstyle as I dedicated a lot more of my playtime to running instances and raiding, and this did actually continue as the level cap was progressively raised throughout the lifespan of the server. But in that time frame, I still played on Arkenstone, one of the regular servers. In my return to YouTube, actually, with Minas Morgul, I picked back up with challenging group content and even like up to mid-tier difficulty. Maybe this expansion I didn't really make as much progress as I had previously in LOTRO because my playtime was really split between two servers, but if you look back at my channel, I had tons of endgame content back then. Then we got the Gundabad expansion in late 2021. Once the first set of group content was released with 2-3 mans after the expansion launch, I farmed those and pushed higher difficulties, but then I went on winter break from December to January 2022. And this is where everything changed for me. I spent basically all of my time playing on Anor when I returned, and what happened is I took like an unintentional break from the Gundabad endgame content. Despite a new 6-man instance and a new raid launching, I had zero interest in them at all. Moving forward, the Anor progression server was actually shut down as it caught up to the level 140 cap, and my kin transferred to Landreval. This is in mid-2022. Fast forward to today, we are here in mid-2023, and while I have at least played each of the new instance pieces that has been released since Gundabad, with Before the Shadow and Return to Karn-Dûm, I have never gone back to that style of regularly running in-game group content as my primary focus in my LOTRO playtime. And honestly, outside of group content, I haven't even played LOTRO's new landscape zone that released would be about a month from writing this video with update 36, and that contained new storylines that will continue into Umbar and Harad expansion in late 2023, which is very unusual for me. So after this long introduction, what I really want to explain in this video is why I haven't been playing nearly as much endgame group content in LOTRO at the level 140 cap and in just the past year compared to how much I normally have, and why I haven't had as many endgame videos on my channel. And it all starts with a question: what was different about LOTRO before Gundabad? Has LOTRO gotten worse over this time period, or is it me that has changed and not LOTRO? Before Gundabad, I regularly ran instances with my kin on Arkenstone. I really enjoyed a lot of the level 130 content, even with the disconnection between the Durin storyline when I joined in and Minas Morgul. It was all fun to me, but I was doing this pretty much without any alts. As fun as the content was, there were actually a lot of things about LOTRO systems that I didn't really like, and they actively dissuaded me actually from playing alts due to the repetitive grind involved with them. I even made a series of admittedly poorly executed videos on this. From those videos, I discussed the combination of the repetitive grind and alt unfriendliness of the virtue trait system, legendary item system, and clash trait point system. The last was my biggest personal demotivator actually in playing and leveling alts in LOTRO. So where do these stand today? Well, in late 2021 with the Gundabad expansion pre-patch, the legendary item system was revamped. While I don't think the new system is perfect or even great for late endgame progression, it is so much better from the leveling and entry level endgame perspective. It is just super easy to get a decent set of baseline LIs that properly scale with your character's level. Setting up a freshly level cap character, even like an alt with decent LIs, is not really a worry at all anymore. Even more, there is room for progression at endgame, and to an extent, parts of that are exciting to me. For Clash Trait Points, the Before the Shadow mini expansion that launched in November 2022 included what I called the biggest LOTRO change in years, because this update completely overhauled the way you get Clash Trait Points and really fixed it to not only eliminate the repetitive grindiness of acquiring them, but also making the Clash Trait Point system just much more alt friendly. It's a complete non-issue now, and I have fun actually building my characters as they level up, contrast to a couple of years ago. Acquiring trait points is actually exciting again, and I think this is still the single best change to LOTRO since the class trait points were originally introduced nearly 10 years ago in the Helm's Deep expansion. For virtue traits, there hasn't been a similar scale overhaul to the system, but one of my complaints was the lack of sources of virtue XP. Throughout 2021, 2022, and now 2023, the developers have added a lot of new sources of virtue XP outside of just deeds, including some actually repeatable and reliable sources of virtue XP. I personally think that the system is still, even with those very unfriendly to playing alts, but there is no denying that it is at least in a better state than in 2021 before Gundabad, when I was actually playing in-game content more frequently. But wait a minute, my biggest criticisms of LOTRO in-game content have actually greatly improved since then. Clearly, that should mean that these aspects of LOTRO are in fact not worse, and that LOTRO as a whole is a better game for it. So why haven't I been playing as much in-game content lately? Maybe it's exactly that, the content. I suffered from severe burnout from the early days of Gundabad. I loved the questing experience and spent a lot of time playing the in-game content, except the main in-game content here was effectively 3 repeatable quests that didn't really give all that much, and then there were 2 3-man instances which also didn't really offer a ton of loot. But because I did have so much fun with Gundabad, I just continued to want to play, and that is exactly what I did until I headed off for winter break. Even when I got back from winter break though, I was so burnt out on Gundabad that I didn't return to LOTRO at all until late January. And as the days just passed by in 2022, I just kept playing on and over even with new Gundabad endgame content launching. It wasn't really a planned break, but it actually ended up being a much needed break. Yet at the same time, back on the Anor server, I was running endgame content from Mordor to the Grey Mountains and extending even into Minas Morgul once again. I was doing endgame content. It was just a lower level cap, but it was still level cap endgame content on the progression server. But even then, I actually did treat endgame content differently. Instead of farming these instances on repeat and just lusting for the small incremental boosts with a slightly higher item level piece of gear from the higher tier instances, I just started to focus on the experience of the instances. I limited my group content playtime to only when my kin organized their weekly events. Instead of raiding twice or even 3 times or sometimes more times a week, we were running stuff once a week. And even with that, sometimes I wouldn't even be able to join, further limiting my group content playtime. Coincident with my Gundabad break and increased playtime here on Anor, the LOTRO team was actually full steam ahead with launching low-level content and major updates instead of new endgame content. I don't think this was the cause for my lack of Gundabad playtime, but I will say maybe if there was new endgame content released in this time frame, it could have piqued my interest enough to make a grand return. With continued low-level content added to LOTRO with Yondershire, I actually didn't even play through the new zone until a few months later, and that was only because I made a leveling challenge of a new character with my Dwarf Warden. This character was the product though of a big change to allow for more race and class combinations. A great example of non-content related update. A similar tale can actually be told about my Minstrel. This character and his adventures were a product of the 15th anniversary Valar giveaways and later the Minstrel class revamp, and then actually a whole other resurgence with the class trait point changes near the end of 2022 that came with Before the Shadow, which was yet another low-level update to cap off a year of low-level zones being added to LOTRO. This update did at least include the new delving system, a new 6-man instance, and a new skirmish relevant to endgame gearing. With these, I did actually run the 6-man instance and new skirmish, but I didn't repeat them that much. I only ran them a couple times on both my Warden and Runekeeper and basically got my fill. Like the late days of Nor, here I was going for the experience and not to be like slightly larger numbers on gear from higher tiers. With the delving system and fresh missions, I did run those quite a bit, but I also didn't repeat them a ton. Basically, I ran them until I got my fill and did not force myself to farm them for those small gear gains that I could actually still use. Even as the delving system has been expanded to 3-man and 6-man instances, I haven't been overly interested in playing those just for gear. Remaining consistent, I only run those if my kin schedules them as one of our weekly events. But in all this content from 2022, nothing about it is inherently bad, and the content itself hasn't actually impacted my endgame playtime. But what we did see is some LOTRO updates such as the class trait point changes, recent class revamps, and the such motivating me to play some of my leveling characters that weren't even doing anything related at all to the new content being added to the game. With Return to Karn Doom in March 2023, LOTRO saw its first endgame focused update since the Gundabad expansion with 2 3-mans, a 6-man, and a raid. Also in this update was the Captain and Warden class revamps. For the Warden, that is my main class, and I think one of the biggest successes of the update was more or less fixing Warden tanking. This naturally made me want to play tank on my Warden, and in combination with the new instance content, I ran it all. Even with my friends and some kinmates wanting to run the instances, say fairly frequently, I still actually did not spend a lot of time just farming the instances just for gear upgrades. I did run the 3-mans on higher tiers, but that was for the experience, not the gear. In general in LOTRO, I actually love 3-mans and usually 6-mans. I think partially because of the natural flexibility in group composition and ability to pull off victories with like janky, unoptimized setups. It kind of follows the same idea of random challenges like duoing Great Barrow with a hunter and a lore master. The most expected combination for a 6-man instance, right? But with Return to Karn Doom, I can actually say that I don't like that 6-man instance basically at all. It is in fact one of the most boring and even annoying dungeons that I have ever played in LOTRO, and I have much fewer but actually still my fair share of complaints about the raid. Even though I'm not a big fan of those content pieces though, that is subjective, and just because I don't like them doesn't mean it's bad content, and it does not mean that LOTRO is worse. The same can be said for Update 36, which I mentioned I haven't even played through King's Gondor, even as my LOTRO playtime recently has drastically increased the past few weeks. I can't fault the content though for just not really motivating me to play through it. LOTRO isn't worse because I want to do other things when I play the game. So I'm guessing we've all reached the same conclusion at this point. LOTRO is not worse, but I have indeed changed. I just don't like raiding as much as I used to. There are a lot of factors to it, but I find the time investment in combination with like the large crowded nature of them to just not be as appealing as it used to be. I've also become more, say, bored with the typical like formulaic nature in raids. Sometimes it honestly just feels like you're trying to be a robot. But even with the 6-mans, my old favorite form of content, I can definitely still enjoy, but I have tended to prefer kind of the tight-knitness of 3-mans and even duo content with delvings. In my experience, not only do these smaller group content pieces actually lead to a wider variety of gameplay experiences, but they also actually offer a greater individual gameplay challenge. This shift in interest hasn't really been anything intentional or even much of a conscious decision on my end, and actually the past year or so has been a bit of a struggle with that. Nowadays, I do have less time to just simply play LOTRO and even other games in general. Partially this is because of my YouTube channel being as big as it is, which is an absolutely wonderful thing that it does help contribute to my cost of living, but the big downside is I basically have to treat YouTube as a second job to ensure I can pay the bills and spoil my cats. And from the YouTube end of things, it's no secret that my channel is not growing as much as it was in 2021 and early 2022 with the insane 15th anniversary event in LOTRO. While viewership numbers aren't terrible, a lot of my videos from like 2019 to 2021 era have just naturally fallen off because they're, well, quite a bit old now. I have never really allowed myself to feel forced into making specific content on my channel, so that does mean y'all are getting basically whatever I'm enjoying the most. That also does mean though that it's been more difficult to keep up with like fresh, relevant, and informative content. But for now, I'll just keep doing what I enjoy in LOTRO and making the best videos that I can. You might wonder though, what do I enjoy in LOTRO? Well, in a follow-up to this video, I will be discussing why I play LOTRO in 2023 despite not just playing as much in-game content as I used to. This was a bit of a tough video, but the future is bright and I am looking forward to the Umbar expansion later this year. Let me know how you view in-game content in LOTRO and how often you run instances and maybe raids nowadays. And I will see you in the next video on why I still play LOTRO.